Alright guys, welcome to Noble Productions' first episode of Building Academy. Starting out with architectural styles, we are looking at a vanilla build right now, the vanilla L house in all of the villages. I'm using that as the base plate for everything else, because we can move straight into upgrading that house into a rustic or improved vanilla house. Keeping the cobblestone base, using the wood planks universally as walls all the way around instead of the weird combination of cobblestone and oak that it originally used. Just framing the corners with timber gives it a more rustic feel. Having a different colored roof from the walls helps everything stand out. Getting the overhang in here, getting some trapdoors for shutters, just not using full blocks around doors with a little bit of a roof arch going on, adding some plants to the front. That tiny amount of work can make even the vanilla build look somewhat respectable. This is actually very respectable. If this is what you're doing in a rural setting, in a rustic setting, this is perfect. You're doing great. But let's say you're in an area that's not rustic. Let's say you're building somewhere more medieval or more Victorian even. Then we're going to go on to the Tudor. The Tudor style is going to be very common in castle cities, in Victorian cities, in steampunk cities, or in just old-timey England cities. Anything from castle era forward, because these buildings were built to last. The difference is going to be if it's a very old Tudor, you're not going to use this brick. You're going to use stone brick for the first floor. That's going to signify what era this was built in, whether this is stone brick or brick. Other than that, everything above this is going to be exactly the same. You're going to have half-timbered second, third, fourth stories that jut out from each the story below it. That was done to add extra floor space from the amount of land that you purchased, because you purchase land, air is free. Purchase land, air is free. This is a bit of a fake jetty. Jetty is the term used for coming out one block or two blocks even. It's a decorative jetty that doesn't actually increase the wall size. That's stylistic, I guess. You can also do an actual jetty where the wall will come out one block and this will come out one block and everything comes out one block, so you have more space inside. Another part of Tudor building is the half timber style, where I've done a bit of an experiment with it. You can use the logs going vertically here instead of these fence posts, and everywhere you see these vertical fence posts, you could do vertical log work instead. It's bigger, it's more obvious that way, but it's also flatter. And I was trying to add depth, because adding depth is a very important part of improving building. Keeping things flat is not conducive to exciting builds. Tudor styles, again, very solid framework on the bottom, some form of brick or stone. You could even use sandstone if that fits with the color palette better, which I'll be doing a video on color palettes in the future. Tudor styles often have gabled roofs because it gives you access to an attic space. They would frequently have dormers. I'll cover dormers over there. They're going to have fireplaces. You want fireplaces in most of your builds because they'd be very prototypical. Another aspect of Tudors is that glass became more and more common over time, so the newer your Tudor is, the more glass it's going to have. They like windows. It adds light, and light was hard to come by in the cities. Everything was very crowded. And also, it's a bit of a statement piece. If you can afford the glass, you have something of money. Some kind of money. Moving on from Tudors, I have something a little bit off base from that. We're on to the modern styles, which is another very popular style on Minecraft. It's going to be very boxy, very cubey, very rectangular. You want to mix different building materials. I've used nether brick, concrete, and acacia wood. You don't want your different styles and different boxes to line up perfectly flat. This is probably the only place on the build where that happens. Otherwise, everything's going to jut out by at least a half block vertically or a full block horizontally, just to add depth and dimension. Another huge aspect is taking the add glass from tutors to the extreme in that you want walls of glass sometimes. Glass is hugely important in modern builds. Also, modern builds will, because of walls of glass, usually not have drapery inside. So what you end up with is exterior blinds sometimes, or just overhangs large enough to provide shade from the sunlight. You can get creative with that. There's different ways to handle that. Modern builds actually fit this L shape fairly well because they're definitely just going to be boxes inside of boxes, boxes around boxes. There's a lot of different ways to do that, but as a general rule, boxes inside of boxes, sticking out of boxes. Let's see, moving on, I have something a little bit more of a castle style, which was really just trying to fit the aspects of a castle into the size of a build. It's not super conducive to that, but what we usually have is we have arrow slits, we have some type of column-like framework. You can have this be flush with the wall and use these iron bars, or you can have it jut out from the wall, like over here, where it juts out. There's different ways to handle that. You're going to have some form of overhang somewhere so that you can include murder holes over your entrances. You're going to have functional arrow slits if you'd like. I enjoy functional arrow slits, where these ones you can actually look down at an angle rather than using full blocks. You can open the trapdoor and you have a much wider field of view, thanks to the combination of upside down stairs and right side up stairs at the giving you a viewing angle. You'll want this on a slab so that you can actually get up to this part. Otherwise, you'd be at the wrong height to do it. Arrow slits, holes to let light in. Glass wasn't super common. It was a thing, obviously. They had glass. First ground floors are going to be, again, arrow slits, small holes. You're being defensive. You don't want people to get in and attack you, so smaller holes are better. Also banners. Banners are going to be very useful in castle builds. I go banner happy throughout this whole video, but they're going to be very useful in castle builds to show allegiances, to show houses, parties, etc. Roof types, kinda you can do whatever you want. There's nothing specific there. You're going to have flat roofs, you're going to have gable roofs, you're going to have hip roofs. I'll do a video on roofs in the future, but they're kind of all options as far as castles go. Moving on to a desert style. Very common aspects of desert styles are going to be woodwork jutting out, the framing for the roof jutting out from the walls, and that's going to run all the way through the build as almost a decorative piece by this point, because it adds depth, it adds height. You're going to use slabs for the roof so that you have this sticking out here. Very often, desert buildings are going to have covered patios. There's different ways to do these that I can go over in a future video, but some form of covered patio that gives you some place to hide from the sun while still being outside. Also, window coverings of some form. I've used banners here to directly block sunlight, whereas elsewhere I've done wool carpet overhangs, awnings, to block sunlight from above, but not from or of an angle. That's, I guess, different options of ways you can do that, but generally desert build, same shape as this. I haven't changed the shape at all yet, other than adding a second story. just changing the materials, changing the details you add, such as the awnings and the logs and the crenellations, etc. Just changing this stuff can drastically change what you've built. I have a Mediterranean Roman style here next, using the red sandstone with regular sandstone gives a very nice contrast. Mediterranean builds very commonly use slab roofs. They'll also very commonly have tall, thin windows, almost always with shutters. You really only need the single shutter. This is probably excessive what I've done here. I've also opted to go with a flat door instead of a recessed door. Little stylistic changes you can make. They're very commonly going to have an overhanged area where you can use it for storage, you can use it as a sitting area, but it gives you more use of that same shape of the building. They're also going to very commonly have a upper patio on the roof because they were making use of the space they had available. And in the Mediterranean, it's nice outside, so you want to use that. Moving on, we have a Georgian. Georgians are going to be a very big example of how the style of build is going to affect the shape of the build, because Georgians are rectangles. That is almost not arguable. They are rectangles. They are not L shapes. They are rectangles that occasionally will have symmetrical things come off on either side, so then they're rectangles with other rectangles. They have very decorative doorways, and they'll usually have some form of decoration on top of the windows. This small of a house, this is the most decoration you can really get. Larger houses are going to have something more arch-like. Georgians also have smaller windows and smaller second stories on the second floor. And as you go up further, you're going to have a third floor in the attic, which is where the dormers come in. Georgians almost always have dormers to make use of that attic space and turn it into a living space, providing windows. A dormer is literally just a portion of the wall that sticks out from the roof to provide a window. That's all that is. Symmetrical large chimneys are also a very big aspect of Georgians. This house is really small to have two fireplaces, but showing the style. Two fireplaces symmetrically placed, or as close to symmetrical as possible in the build, so that the chimneys are still relatively the same. Windows on most of the fronts was very common, because normally Georgians are very thin and wide. They'd be maybe 1 or 2 rooms deep, so having windows all along all of the sides was a very good way to get light into the rooms. You didn't really have many rooms in the center of the house that did not have access to light. We have a suburban house up next. Suburban. I could do a video on Suburbans all by themselves because there are so many ways to build them, but common facets of assets of a suburban house is that you're going to mix at least usually 2 building materials. I've gone with the quartz column for siding, and then you'll have a brick or a stone of some kind to offset that. Another common aspect is complex roof work. This is several roofs kind of put together around each other almost. Again, there's going to be a video on roofs in the future, but complex roof work is a very common aspect of suburban houses, as are covered porches, which I have here, and a foundation layer that is different from the main base of the house. Other than that, suburban houses are actually fairly simple once you have those aspects in mind. The shape of a suburban house is usually what defines it. Moving on to the next thing is we have a traditional Japanese house, which is not something I had any experience in before this video, so I've really just gone for what are the things that stand out and make anyone look at it and say, that is traditional Japanese. This is probably not accurately Japanese or accurately traditional, but the important aspects are going to be the upturned corners of the roof, the multi-level roof done with slabs and then going into a gabled stair roof with windows on either end for airflow, the upturned roof bits on the gable portion of the roof. Porches are very common. The house being on stilts is very common, or at least the outer edge of the house being on stilts. Using sliding doors, trap doors to make sliding doors, it looks a little better when you have more door space, but to get the point across, you have the trap door on this block and on that block so that it looks like it can slide against each other, using polished wood as the first layer of the actual house bit, not the foundation bit, but the house itself, using a white block of some kind, be it white terracotta like I have here, or concrete, or something along those lines, as long as it's white. I've also used the polished wood to frame the windows on both the top and the bottom, so that it just helps add the depth that you're looking for when you make builds. They're also usually half timbered, like the Tudor, so you have the option of doing the timber framing or the fence post framing. Again, that's going to come down to which one you prefer, so long as you have wood framing the white material. Considering I don't know this style all that well, that's kind of all I have to offer you on that. If it's a style that you're going to spend a lot of time on, you're going to want to spend a lot more time on research than I did. I spent about an hour and a half. Yeah. Moving on, we have the Viking style, which this is more of a traditional Viking as opposed to what I see on a lot of servers, which is a Tudor with a Viking roof. I don't know how that happened, but it's a very common thing to see. So a more traditional Viking house is going to have very low-hanging roofs. The roofs come down almost to the ground sometimes. I'm pretty sure that's just to help deal with snow. They're also going to have very small windows because glass was not a thing yet. So having glass windows is not prototypical, but it's still an option because it's Minecraft. You do what you want. Sunken floors on the inside with a ring of floor at normal height is very common on Viking houses. It gave them somewhere to sit and sleep, and then this would be usually dirt sometimes, or just be sunken, and then you'd have a fire pit, which would have some form of ventilation in the roof. I've opted to have low, very low windows in here just so that it gets reflected light, because the large overhangs are going to block most direct sunlight. Banners are going to be very useful on Viking builds because you're showing off clan loyalty, you're showing off what have you. If you can put shields on the walls in Java, that would be a fantastic thing to do. I don't have access to shields here in Bedrock. Stone foundations are a very common thing. Timber framing is a very common thing. A lot of the time, if it's a longer build, you'll have the timber framing actually be a block out and go up to the roof as it goes along, but the size of this build doesn't really warrant that, so I didn't do that. Also, a very common aspect of Viking roofs is the X-cross, where you're going to have this frame come out and keep going for a bit, and this frame come out and keep going for a bit. There's a handful of different ways to physically construct this. I just did it all out of stairs, so that it kind of has a little bit of depth here. You can also use different materials for the roofs. That's not terribly important. You can use birch to simulate straw. You can use darker colors to simulate wood. Whatever works for your color palette. Moving on, we have Elven, and the biggest problem with describing both Elven builds and Dwarven builds is that there are hundreds of ways that you could build them. I cannot cover them in one video. I don't think I could cover them in a series of videos because it's a fantasy thing. It doesn't exist in real life. There is no hard and fast rule. You do what you want. But generally, Elven builds are going to favor open to the element stuff. So I've gone and replaced the walls on the front of the house with an open porch, essentially. I have an entirely open second floor that's just inside of the roof. Elven roofs tend to be very steep. There's multiple ways of making that happen, but you're looking for a very steep roof. They also tend to prefer adding a lot of decoration to the house. There's, again, a lot of ways to do decoration, but anything that adds decoration and curvature also, they like round curvature, natural shapes as much as possible. Banner work to add color, because otherwise all this white gets very boring to look at. You can use leaves, you can use other splashes of color. Banners were just really useful. I love banners. You're still going to have some form of interior space that is protected from the elements. You're going to have access to a deck or porch of some kind, probably. The second floor, again, just it's a very open attic, basically. It's open-ended on both ends, protected from the elements through the roof. You have a decorative support beam running through. You have lighting in there. Not super complex, but not super simple either. There's just a handful of things to keep in mind as you build it, and then you can kind of just go to town. And finally, we have the Dwarven style, which, again, there's hundreds of ways that you could do this. This is just an example that includes some of the aspects. They're going to like column work. They're going to build very tall. This is one story. This is a one-story building, but they build very tall. They're going to have tall windows, tall walls. Their roofs are going to be really high up there. You could also probably, instead of using slabs, you could go with something much more vertical like that, just to give a very massive feeling inside. They're also going to include rare elements, rare materials into the build, because dwarves like shiny things. So you're going to add gold, you're going to add iron, you're going to add diamond or emerald, what have you. Anything shiny, they're going to put in their walls. Obviously, that won't be appropriate if your server allows people to steal things from you like that. Don't waste your gold then. But if you're somewhat protected, you can go ahead and do that. Also, using anything you can to add depth, because they're mostly going to be building in stone. You can use quartz with it for more decoration, but I chose not to because that's all quartz, and I wanted it to be different. Anything to add depth. You're going to use a lot of stairs. Depth. All of the depth. That's really what you're going for, because it's a very monotonous gray block that you're going to be working in most of the time. And even if you're doing dwarves in a different environment, say you're doing like desert dwarves, well, then you're kind of doing this palette, but this shape. And it's going to be the same problem of it's all the same color, so you have to add depth somehow. Using the banners, because dwarves are always going to be representing their dwarven house or clan, again, helps add color and it helps distinguish your house from someone else next door. They're also going to usually have very recessed doorways, so the fact that this doorway is 2 blocks deep is very common of dwarven builds. They're also usually bigger doors. Keeping with the same size as the vanilla house, I didn't want to do a double door, so using trapdoors to simulate extra doors, a 3-wide door works. Yeah, that's pretty much dwarven builds. You can do the roofs however you want, because dwarves tend to build underground. When they build above ground, I feel like they kind of just do whatever works. So that was 12 plus vanilla architectural styles in Minecraft that you'll want to learn what is fitting for your server, what is fitting for your character, and which ones you prefer to build in before you get too in-depth in anything like shape or materials, because architectural style will determine shape and materials a lot of the time. Thanks for coming. Thanks for viewing my video. Hopefully you share and subscribe. Anything to help get the word out, because the whole reason I'm doing this is just to help people get a better grasp of what they're doing. So the more people you share this with, the more Minecrafters we can all have a fantastic time building wonderful houses to live in, building wonderful cities and villages to live in and play in. Thanks for coming, and I'll be looking forward to having another video out soon to continue the Building Academy lessons.